Um, I have a bunch of questions you all sent in. Do you want me to just sort of go down through them, or maybe based on something I've said, you've got a question about what it's like to be, in the boardroom when there's only 10 people in there? Yeah.
So you said you don't necessarily have to be the title leader, but you can still exhibit the leadership qualities where people still turn to you. How do you do that? By what you say or what you do, like in the project room versus the boardroom? How would you go about doing that?
Well, I would first reflect that back to you and think about those opportunities that someone in the room, other than the guy with the title, sort of falls into that leadership position. Some of it has to do with confidence. Some of it has to do with background and experience. Some of it has to do with willingness to take on more work. You think about those types of things, but I would say minimally, it requires that you act like a leader. And it's one of those things that you know it when you see it. It's how people carry themselves. It's as a leader in a room, if you notice that Sharon wants to say something but isn't able to get her words out before somebody else talks all over her, by saying, hang on a minute, I think Sharon wants to say something. You're acting as a leader and making sure that everyone's room. So sit back and watch some of the next meetings or discussions you're in, and think about that. And think about how you could fill that role without elbowing other people out of the way. Because you're never going to follow somebody that's just a bull in a china shop, right? And you don't want to be that guy. Yeah.
And along those lines, how do you, you mentioned a little bit about being passed over for this job promotion that was perfect for you. How do you deal with that when there's a lot of overt and subtle sexism that exists in the workplace? Like, there's been a lot of psych studies done where they have mixed gender groups or same gender groups at a table, and usually people think that the person sitting at the head of the table is a leader, but if it's a mixed gender group, if it's a woman, the idea of her being perceived as a leader goes down drastically by like half. So how do you, in those situations, I understand like we definitely should be assertive and act like
And sit at the head of the table.
Right, exactly. But like what happens when you're in an environment that just because you're a woman, it's going to be that much harder for you to be ever perceived as a leader?
I would say to you, and I noticed this, I told Sophie earlier, a lot of the questions that I got were focused on the woman part as opposed to the C-suite part. And certainly this is a safe area to have that sort of discussion. But don't place more emphasis than you need to on the woman part. Everybody has something, whatever it is. I never got to work in operations in a chemical plant, and they think I don't know engineering, or whatever. There's something in people's background that they feel like it kind of holds them down. Your job is to figure out a way to not let that bother you, and therefore not let it bother anybody else. So I am here to tell you, when there are 10 people in the boardroom, and 9 of them are men, and you're in a manufacturing industry, there's another thing you've probably read. A woman will say something, and somebody will go, oh, that's reasonable, and then they go on to something else, and 5 minutes later, the guy across the room says the same thing, and everybody thinks it's a great idea. It really happens. It really, really happens. They've also done studies that if there are 2 women in the room, it happens a lot less. Not because the other woman comes to her rescue, although that happens sometimes. But I don't believe it's conscious. I really don't believe it's intentional. So what you have to do, if for some reason you're being minimalized, is that word? You need to ignore that action or lack of action on their part. And you need to say, I'll say, stick up for yourselves. If the group isn't ready to talk about your subject at that moment, that's fine. And if they're ready later, that's fine too. Just make sure you build on when Bob repeats your comment. Say something like, I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why, and this is why it would be of benefit, so that people are seeing you as adding to that thing of value. All right? Eventually, they figure it out. I've had men walk up to me and go, I don't know why I did that. You said that earlier, didn't you? Mm-hmm. So, it's, different people handle it differently. But I would say, don't let their blinders be your barrier. You just need to figure out a way to get the blinders off. So if they don't hear you in a room full of 10 people, find ways to talk to them ahead of time, one-on-one, to make sure they know that you've got this idea and you're going to bring it up at the operations meeting today. And ask for their thoughts and input. They may say, that's great, or they may say, ooh, if we did that, this would happen. And you say, man, I hadn't thought about that. and you slightly tweak your approach at that point. But, there are whole cultures. Is anybody in here French? Everybody's French. Worked for a French company, so easy for me to talk about. But they spend a lot of time outside meetings preparing everybody for what's going to be said in the meeting so that they have clarity about how to optimize the go-forward plan. So people aren't hearing ideas for the first time in the meeting. They hear them outside the meeting. Americans are more about shooting from the hip, right? And we're just going to bring up the idea when it occurs to us, whether or not it's the right time in the conversation. So I would say to you, as women, we can't hang our heads and do the oh, woe is me. So remember, when I was the young engineer, I said, all right, somehow they didn't think I was right for this job. I'm going to find out what I need to do differently so I can fix that. So I am right for this job. I didn't do it to catch the guy flat-footed, and find out that he hadn't considered me. I thought he had considered me and decided I wasn't the right person. Although it worked out well for me, because 6 months later, another identical job came open and I got that job. So I would say to you all, recognize it as the issue that it is. Don't think there's an issue when there isn't, so don't see ghosts when there aren't any. People make mistakes. If somebody's treating you like their daughter and you want to be treated like a coworker, call them out on it. Bob, I really appreciate the extra attention, and I feel like sometimes you take care of me like I'm your daughter, but you know what? I need to trip and fall on my nose by myself sometimes. He might not have even known what he was doing, right? So you will be in awkward situations, and I would say many people end up in those awkward situations for various reasons. You need to find a graceful way, and here we are. Play on your strengths. Find a graceful, ladylike way to let them save face, but make them aware of the impact of what's happened, and that's not going to be a problem for you. At the end of the day, there are a lot of studies about how much women get paid versus men, etc. I believe in my heart you are going to find you're also going to, for every ding or diss or negative thing that happens, there'll be an opportunity that you get that the guys aren't going to get. Because they look around and they go, well look, it's all white men in this room. We ought to bring somebody else in for a different perspective or a different view. All right, well, you and all the white guys who are your peers in your age group, you get picked. That's going to upset those guys, right? So I used to say it's not fair, I shouldn't get that opportunity. But then I'd see something where I didn't get an opportunity. And I just decided in my head, you know what, it's going to even out. And I think over time it did. Doesn't mean I wasn't going home, you know, kicking the tree when I got out of the car because I was upset or angry. But again, you always have to be professional at work. And if you can rise above others' lack of professionalism, you win. There may be situations where you have to leave too. So I'm not saying every situation is fixable. If you're being harassed and you can't get it to stop, get out of there. But I would also say, and I've had this discussion with engineers underneath me, when you're in college, you dress a certain way. When you get to the work world, your skirts get longer and your shirts get a little higher. Right? Nobody wants to have a professional discussion with somebody else staring at their cleavage. But women or men, you know, it's just distracting at the end of the day. And again, it's okay in college. It's not okay in business. And I hope you have a boss that's comfortable telling you that if you walk in with something that's over the line. Okay? Yeah.
I have a question going a little bit different track. So going back to the, you should be a leader even if you don't have the title in that situation. How do you walk that thin line of demonstrating those qualities without trying to usurp the person in charge?
Right. And again, it is a thin line. A lot of times, what I would do, especially if I saw the train going off the tracks, I would describe it in a way that helps the leader. Right? Bob, it's really hard for you to scribe while you're trying to run the meeting. Can I take notes for you? On the whiteboard or on the flip charts? Right? And in taking notes, maybe the problem was people kept talking because their thought wasn't written down. You had that, right? Or you keep talking because you don't see the guy paraphrases and he does it wrong, and he won't change it so that it looks like what you meant. Okay, well, if you've got the pen, you can make sure you've captured what the person said, and you can turn around and go, did I get it? And that lets the meeting move on because they've been heard and they can see it's written up there. But the guy that's trying to be too controlling, you know, maybe he has an agenda, isn't trying to capture what was actually said. But again, it's a way to be active in the meeting and assure everybody's voice is being heard. If there is no consensus, saying it out loud, you know, it seems like we're struggling to get a consensus here. Should we take a break and meet again tomorrow after we've thought about this for a while? And the guy who's running the meeting may say, no, I'm just going to make a command decision. Okay, I guess he's got the right to do that. But it allows you to say, okay, well, you've heard what we've said. Where are you leaning? You know, it allows you to create a dialogue. And again, you're not taking the leadership away from him, but you're helping move the project or the conversation forward. That makes sense?